Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
Welcome.
I'm Thomas. This is Kevin.
Nice to meet you for the first time
Yeah,
ever.
can you believe it? So I am going to butcher all your fancy things that you are.
That's okay.
But you are Rachel Harper. One of the coolest people I know for sure. And then take me through, because I know you've got like a million degrees and certifications and things that make you part of who you are. What are those?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start. I have a bachelor's degree in kinesiology. I have a master's degree in the psychology of sport and physical activity. And then I have a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And I'm strength and conditioning coach certified through the CSCCA. And I'm also a licensed professional counseling candidate in the state of Oklahoma.
Woo! So you got a couple of things there.
They seem like they all intertwine, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They do, luckily. I'm very thankful for that. And actually, that's why I kept getting more education, is because I wanted to intertwine with what I started with in the world of strength and conditioning.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Which one did you start with? I guess is my question.
Yeah. I started with strength and conditioning, and then the mental health realm kind of slapped me across the face while I was in the middle of really trying to jumpstart my career in strength and conditioning. I was at a grad assistantship at Illinois State as a strength coach, so essentially free labor for them.
Yeah.
And and that's kind of part of the track of becoming a strength and conditioning coach, is like you have to go through a grad assistantship first.
Right.
So I was just like, they're like, well, pick a master's. I'm like, okay, sure. And then sports psychology was one of the ones I had there. And my whole life, I'd been so interested in psychology, but had just kind of pushed it off to the side for so long. And I was like, all right, here's my chance.
Yeah.
And so then as I was going through that and still training my athletes in the weight room, I was like, oh, wow, this is glass shattering for one, how I wish I would have had this as an athlete. And then two, how desperately my athletes weren't getting the mental health care that they needed.
Right.
And then from there, I was like, all right, I'm jumping ship. I think it's pretty clear I'm being pulled somewhere else now.
Yeah.
So kind of picked it as like, I'm interested and I have to do something, but ended up being the route that you ended up taking.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is going to sound like pretty hyperbolic, but in the best way, I think it really changed my life.
Yeah.
I also, during my strength and conditioning tenure, we'll call it, I was also not mentally well. And so even getting exposed to it was almost in a more friendly way. I was getting exposed to it kind of like externally, like, this is how I'm going to help people, not necessarily like, you need this. But I desperately did. And I learned that I desperately did through experiencing that.
Right.
So it kind of like, it shattered my world professionally, but also personally too.
Well, I feel like that makes sense too, because you start to like really deep dive down into like the world of athletics and the amount of pressure and training and things that are being put on not just adults, but on kids, and like the need and the push for perfection and like the feeling of failure, like all of those things. It's like at the end of the day, I think there's aspects obviously of that are like good for people, of like exposing to losing and doing all that kind of stuff. And that's like, there's not necessarily things that are wrong with that. But on the same token, as like, if you want to perform even at like a high level, it's like, it's not just what's your body, like it's between your ears. There's a huge aspect of doing it, and you're seeing it. I feel like and you would know better than I do, but I feel like I hear about it a lot more with like professional athletes and people who again are just like trying to succeed at a high level of sports, especially like being like an NFL kicker or something, where it's just like, everything's on you, buddy. Go kick that ball 60 yards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and that too, it's like, I feel like for the longest time, luckily, I think the landscape is changing, but like you only heard about it in like the professional realm because they were the only ones that had access to it.
Right.
Like you really didn't hear about it in like anything less than that, especially not like a college like Illinois State or a college like UCO, and you especially didn't hear about it in high school, at least like I didn't. Luckily, the landscape for that is changing, and so people are, it's catching wind. People are actually hearing about it now, and I mean, there's even like the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. They now have like a national certification that you can get. That's kind of like getting a certification as a strength coach. That's making it more well known and credentialed and out there for like people and athletes of multiple ages. I'd say people too, because people in everyday life, whether you're playing a sport or not, you're performing in some form or fashion.
1000%.
Was there, for the athletes that you were working with at the time, was there a commonality for issues that they were dealing with or things that they needed help overcoming, or was it kind of all over the place?
That's a really good question. I had a lot of female teams. I mean, I had some male teams too, but obviously like the female teams just opened up to me more. So I had more like deeper insight into what was going on. And luckily at my time at ISU, I got to also be like a psychological skills trainer as well as being their strength and conditioning coach. So I really got to get in there with some of my teams and find that stuff out. But performance anxiety, like across the board. And I'd say that for, oh my gosh, anyone at any time, but also that's what I saw most often. And then a lot of body image issues for women specifically. Trying to think what else. Overall stress of like, how do I handle school? How do I handle my sport? How do I handle my coach that I freaking hate, but I'm stuck with for my collegiate career? And people, there wasn't spaces for them to talk about it. And so even just like, not like I was even doing anything profound with them, but like I would create spaces for them to even just be able to express some of these things. Like, gosh, this is kind of one of the signals I found out of like, okay, time for me to maybe move out of strength and conditioning was like my stretching and mobility sessions were becoming longer and longer and longer and longer, because that was the perfect time that I could really start like digging into like, well, how's your life?
Yeah, right.
It honestly it makes sense. A lot of times, even I see even trainers here in town, or coaches, working one-on-one with people. And a lot of times I feel like they end up kind of playing the therapist role, because it's the time you're working out and you're just kind of talking, but you're doing that on a regular basis and you start to open up. So yeah, the frequency that like you're with that person. I mean, hell, one of my best friends was actually my AT at the time that I was at ISU, and she was like, I am the team therapist, because they were with her so often. And that was like, what would they talk about? Well,
I'm
eventually,
taping your ankle, might as well talk about stuff,
Yeah, might as well talk about your childhood. She's like, I'm not equipped for this. And I'm like, I know, me neither. Like,
but I'm trying to be.
Yeah.
The performance anxiety is the thing that when sports psychology gets brought up, to me, that's what pops in my head. The thing that I always think about was playing football in high school was, even just during practice, I would always be like, I kind of moved around positions a little bit, but I'd be practicing with the receivers and catching a football was like, for some reason, it was like I just kind of struggled with it, but it was like the coach is throwing it, how I'm performing is is the basis for how much playing time I'm going to get in the game. But we would go, practice would, we'd be at the end of practice and we'd go to just a scrimmage, like no pads, like, hey, we're just, passing the ball around and just having fun. And the coaches aren't even paying attention. I could catch some of the most incredible passes. Like once that performance anxiety was gone, that was like, I definitely wish I would have had that as a kid.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I had a jiu-jitsu coach and I remember talking to him. I was like, I think I want to compete for the first time. And he's like, yeah, like you're going to do great. Like you got everything you need to like be really successful and like growth. I was a white belt, like brand new, but been training for a good enough amount of time to like compete. And I was like, yeah, like, thanks, coach. Like, and this is over messaging. And I was like, yeah, thanks, coach. Like, I'm excited. I really want to do it. And then he goes, unless you get performance anxiety, then you might get hurt out there. And I'm like,
Well, no.
Well, I did it. I wasn't even thinking about that until now.
Plant the seed.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that didn't seem like a
Oh
good
my
thing to
gosh.
say.
Yeah. So as a counselor, is that good advice?
No, that's actually coined in the literature. That's called ironic processing. Like, if I tell you guys right now to think about a white bear, what are you going to think about?
Yeah.
Or like you in football, like if you're thinking about like I can't drop this pass. What are you going to think about? Dropping the pass. Like, I can't get hurt. What are you going to think about? Getting hurt. Like your brain doesn't hear the don't or like have to or the need to. It just hears the thing.
You just imagine that actually happening, being there's not a big red X in your head.
Like, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, like, you know, I know you and I have talked about this a little bit because I helped my wife coach a highly competitive travel volleyball team. And I don't know much about volleyball, but I'm learning. But I know enough about like athletics and some things that like kind of cross over. And talking to you some too, is it's like, you know, that's like our motivation or our way of kind of communicating to the girls a lot is like you want them to serve to you. Like we want you thinking, I want the ball, serve to me. Like, watch how I pass it. You know what I mean? Like instead of being like, don't miss the pass, become like try to, and I don't know if this is like a good advice or anything, but it's like, you know, be out there and be like, I want you to serve that ball at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if you're just mentally telling yourself that, like you're getting away from the mess up, you know? And it is, one of the reasons why this has become so interesting in general to me, and something I know you and I have talked about a little bit recently, but coaching a team of 15-year-old girl volleyball players, you realize the psychology is probably a pretty important aspect to playing a sport. You know what I mean?
At that age in that sport, I'm sure that's a
and
big
it's a
one.
game of mistakes too. Like that's literally the design of volleyball is like, I'm trying, like I want to, you know, like you serve it to us, we pass, set, hit. I want to hit it at your setter so that your setter can't set the ball. They have to pass the ball and someone else has to set. I'm literally trying to make you play a different position than what you play. And that's like getting people, you know, out of system is traditionally what that's called, or at least how I've heard it. And it's like, it's literally like, I am trying to fuck up your system.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make you do something you aren't here to do. And so it's a game of mistakes. And so you can see how, and not just our team, but like teams in general at any sport, but it's like, you know, you start to have, you know, that worry and, you know, oh, I'm going to mess this up or, you know, whatever. And it's very interesting seeing the psychological aspect of just that age group in general, especially.
Yeah. That's I think a very good example of there is going to be a physical ceiling. Like if you get a ball hit at you and there actually is no way for you to do what you need to do with it, it's your capability to bounce back and adjust and be flexible that's going to carry you and your team to where you need to go, not necessarily physically what you're doing.
Right.
And it's just like, like that age group, but any age group.
Right.
Like if you have those kinds of abilities, like that's how you surpass that physical ceiling. But I mean, also what you talked about too, like if you don't even want the ball in the first place, then you can't even get to those other mental strategies.
But that's tough as a setter where it's like you're probably trying to avoid getting the ball.
1000%.
How do you also keep the mindset of I want the ball?
Yeah,
at the
like
same
we
time?
literally hide our setter on serve. Like the setter literally will stand behind a row of girls where like you're the setter, you're standing a step behind me and to the right. So if they hit the ball at you, I'm taking it so that you can play the set. Like it's crazy, but it is, and not to throw in like the whole other aspect of like, we're very blessed, especially this year. We're very blessed this year that we have very supportive sideline parents. We have had some, and we've honestly been lucky. I have seen some teams where you can see a girl's eyes change when dad starts yelling. You know what I mean? Like you just see the switch. And it's I have never seen it be a positive switch personally. Not to say that I guess it doesn't exist, but it's like please dad, shut up. That you can just see in like this girl's face, and you're just like, oh, that's where I think Laurel does a really good job with the parents of like, for this time right now, they're mine.
Yeah, good.
You pay for them to be on this team, they're mine. You can be mom and dad after. Right now, they're mine. I'm the coach. You don't coach. Like,
Yeah, good.
Yeah, because some parents need it.
Yeah. Well, gosh, too, at that young age, like, even though, like, developmentally, you've already reached the point where, like, you're leaning on peers more and coaches and teachers more, there is still an attachment tied to caregivers that hasn't completely gone away yet, specifically at that age. So that is another important point to consider, like, heck yeah, Laurel, for
right.
taking that over. Because, that can absolutely have implications, which I think also, like, maybe this is a whole other can of worms, but like, to me, that also screams at the importance of not only sports psychology and like mental skills training, which I can speak on the difference between mental skills training and mental health counseling if that's helpful. But that's where I think like digging deeper into like, what are those like relational ties in your life? How do you perceive your relationship with your coach, with your teammates, with your parents? How does that perception have implications with how you're interacting with your parents, your coach, your teammates on the court? Because that absolutely plays into how you're performing, not just the mental skills or the physical aspects that you have involved too, which is why I went back to school to get more education on like that kind of deeper rooted stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense too, because like as a, talking through sports therapy, probably ain't all of it about sports.
Yeah. How much of your personal life affects your performance on
1,000%.
the court or field or wherever you're playing.
Yeah. Well, like, if you every time you miss, you don't catch a ball, you feel like a failure because of a relationship you had with your dad, or, like there's like a whole level of like additional things that it's like, or you struggle with this because, growing up, you were never told what you were good at. And so now you're like struggling you could be the best, most talented player out there that doesn't feel it or know it or think it because you've never even had that affirmation or whatever that is.
And you don't have the confidence to perform at your best.
Right, exactly. Where it's like you could have all the physical tools in the world, but you can't have, but if you don't have like this sense of confidence, and we said like if you don't want that ball hit to you because you think you're not going to do well, even though you can dime passes all day long, it's like, well, like there's a lot there, and there's a lot to go through.
Yeah. I mean, that at the end of the day is the be all end all. Like, if you don't even think you can do it, then like someone can't will that for you.
Right.
But this is like concept too is what blows my mind, that people don't train or get like take care of their brain along with the physical training that they're doing. You cannot untie like the brain body connection. That implies there's two. It's not two. It's one unit. It's one unit. And we're training and working on half of it. Like, just like that example you gave of like, well, dad never told me I was good, or like never told me that he loved me. Yeah. Like that narrative, that perception, that experience is going to have implications for how you experience and go through the world. You cannot untie that from the physical things that you're doing. That's why it just blows my mind that people think like, I'll get to that later, or I'll get to that if I'm like professional. It's like, start yesterday.
You might not get to be a professional if you don't work on that today.
Yeah.
How often is it, would you say, if you had to guess, how often is it something like, are there issues like mental issues happening or mental like roadblocks happening because of something like not sports related at all?
Oh my gosh. I think that's the basis for most things that are happening in sport. I think you can tie all of that back into something deeper rooted. Now, is it like, do you have the time to work on that? Like if you have, if state's coming up in 3 weeks, do you have time to work on your relationship with your mom? Probably can't do that at the same time. But that's where I think like working on both of those things together simultaneously, like sports psychology is heavy in cognitive behavioral therapy and like acceptance and commitment therapy. And those things are phenomenal tools. Phenomenal. I mean, very evidence-backed, like they work. And so they're used. But I also personally believe that they're more surface level, which again, great, they work.
Right.
But that still means that there's some shit underneath here we haven't touched
We can
yet.
Band-Aid this.
Yeah, and you can keep band-aiding if you want to do that, but guess what? That the other bottom hoe is going to keep coming up.
Yeah.
And like that's where, things like other therapy modalities like attachment-based work or like existentialism, like some of that deeper stuff, that's harder, deeper work. But that's why I think it's really important to marry the two, at least at some point in time.
Yeah.
Maybe in the off season when you band-aid it for now while when state's coming up in 3 weeks. But at least in the off season, maybe hit some of those things.
Oh my gosh, don't rip open wounds in them. State next week, like let's see what you were doing in childhood.
Well, I think one of the nice things too, and obviously you've got to be somebody who's obviously very happy about this, is like I feel like overall, first off, before I get in the timeout, therapist and counselor, are those different things or are those interchangeable?
Great question. All the terms are crazy, but therapist is essentially can be anybody. Like that can be a psychologist, that can be a psychiatrist, that can be a social worker, that can be a licensed professional counselor. Like all of those can fall under that window. It can be someone not even credentialed. Hey, I'm a therapist. But like someone that says that they are a counselor, like a licensed professional counselor, they have like a licensure attached to that.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay, cool. I've used those interchangeably, and I just want to make sure that I'm like using the right, like an appropriate.
Yeah, I didn't realize therapist was like an over-the-counter term. Yeah.
I'm a therapist.
No, I'm a therapist.
But I think just kind of in general that I feel like more and more, I think by the year, we see the stigma of therapy or counseling in general diminishing, where like people are willing to be much more open. And, I remember seeing a meme where it was like, our parents, and it was like, oh my gosh, like so-and-so's in therapy. And then it's like us today. And it's like, girl, guess what my therapist said to me today? Like where it's like people are a lot more open about it. And I think that is like such a super powerful thing because again, like I know, you and I obviously being friends, outside of here and what you do, like, I see a counselor every week. Like I go to therapy every single week and talk through different things that I've gone through in my life or whatever. And I've even shared some of that stuff with you. And that's been a super awesome thing, by the way, is talking with you through these things and kind of having like another external source of just like information. But yeah, I just, in my mind, I look at it as like no different than any of the other things that I do. Like it is like I lift, I do jujitsu, I run. Like those are things that I do to like train my body and my mind. But and then I have like my recovery as well, where it's like 1 week I go to my chiropractor, the other week I go to my physical therapist, and then I go to therapy once a week. And so it's like, cool, today's my body and mind therapy day. You know what I mean? Depending upon where I'm going and what I'm doing. But it's like, there is again, I think for most people, we're finally getting away from there being like a stigma or that means something's like abundantly wrong, where it's like, in reality, it's like, hey, we all have gone through things. We all deal with things like from a performance standpoint, just in general, like you were talking about before, like work can be a lot, like having a family, being married, like any of those things can cause issues. And just having kind of like what you were referring to earlier with some of the teams is like just having a place to talk, having a place to have somebody, talk you through things, give you a different perspective, give you, obviously science-backed and studied things of ways of dealing with trauma or things that you've gone through. But one of the other things too is it's like, it's also a place to just like converse and talk something out that doesn't directly affect your life either, which I think is such an important thing that I think for me personally, I never really thought about until getting into counseling regularly. It was like, oh, I can like talk about whatever, and it's not like a bunch of changes in my life start happening in like a way I wasn't, like maybe I'm just venting, you know what I mean? Yeah. And my counselor knows when I'm just venting, right? And so it's one of those things where it's not like, okay, well, I said this, and now that I've said it to the managers, well, now they all are mad at me. You know what I
or
mean?
acting different,
Right,
and even not necessarily mad, but like in a way that is not
a change has happened that I don't want. I just needed to get this out.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that that's like such a powerful tool as well of, you know, she's somebody I've talked to about everything, you know what I mean? From childhood to relationships, like work, all of it. You know what I mean?
You talking about me?
Yeah, she knows your name. Yeah, she knows your name.
Did I make it?
There's
Yet?
yeah,
Have I made it
you
yet?
have. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Preston hasn't, so sorry, Preston. I'll bring you up in therapy this week. Don't worry about it. But no, I do think that it is something that and can be profound in ways that like you would never imagine.
Yeah.
Because you start to realize that all of, you know, you are in many ways just aggregate of all the events of your life. And when you start to like unpack those things and work through some of those things, positive and negative, but as you start to kind of work through those things, like, well, you start to learn brand new things about yourself. If you're 33, 63, or 13, like there are things you're going to be like surprised that like, oh, I do kind of need quiet time for such a loud person. Like, man, I really do need times where I just like hit the brakes more, you know? And it's like, and that's something I like personally never thought of myself as, and now I'm like, oh, if I don't get that, I'm gonna be going crazy, you know? And so, yeah, I know that was a lot, but it's just like, it is a very interesting thing. But again, I'm so happy that the idea of doing something like that is finally getting to what it is. And it is just working on yourself like you'd work on yourself any other way, like the gym or whatever you're deciding to do as your modality of like bettering yourself. Why not your brain?
Reading a business book or...
Exactly. Right. Like why would, you know, like, boy, we all get stressed sometimes. Right. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I know that was a lot, but I think it is, I'm just happy, and I'm sure all the counselors and therapists are all out there happy too, that I think there still is some, obviously, but I think it is getting much, much better than what it was. Like people being willing to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, like as part of the gambit of ways that you take care of yourself, like you get enough sleep and I, you know, fix my mind sometimes, or I make it better because it's already doing well. You know, that. But also I think like how you explain all of that, which thank you for sharing all of that. I think it really speaks to how we are relational creatures and we can learn a lot about ourselves relationally through other people. Otherwise, you're knocking the same ideas around the same four walls. There's four, I counted. And so I think that really just speaks to like how beautiful of a process that can be, but like that's also, of course, a very vulnerable process. But you know, being able to speak to a vulnerability speaks to someone else's vulnerability. Right. And that also helps people become more emotionally responsive. And we're all emotive beings too, which all of that tracks back into like attachment and relational work. I think everything literally leads back to that. Right. And so I think if like the more people can, again, like lean into that, the relational aspects, the emotional aspects, the vulnerability aspects, and accept that that's part of the human experience and no one has to go through that alone. No one is tougher or bigger than that. Like if you're a human, you got that, bro. Like I think the more that we can like lean into that aspect, the more it will continue to become part of people's like regular gambit of care.
Right.
You mentioned quiet time and you mentioned knocking things around in the same four walls. Would you say there's any importance to time there of just thinking through things in conjunction with counseling?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, any kind of reflection, introspection of any kind is going to be beneficial for you because that's helping all the different, just to put it in a really crude way, like that's helping integrate and intertwine all the different systems of your brain together. There's actually been some recent studies out there. I forgot the name of it. It's not connectivity, it's another word, but about how the more you can integrate those systems to come online together in one way, the more or the increase in overall well-being that you'll have. And one way you can do that is by having that reflective time, by being more introspective, by one word I really love that also comes from like attachment-based work is curiosity. The more that you're curious about the world, about others, and especially about yourself, the more you're going to have internal harmony. If you have internal harmony, you're probably more likely to have external harmony. And then it's the one all big harmony.
Yeah, it makes sense though.
That was one thing I realized, I think, more than a few years ago. But since we moved to Oklahoma and started business, I think I realized that every single day, every single hour, almost every single minute, there wasn't a time where I wasn't being stimulated by something, whether that was a customer in the store, working out, on my phone, either working or just, on social media. It was like every single second of every day was filled with something. And I can remember the first time I read something about a professor gave an assignment to his class of go back to your places, find the most quiet, dark place that you can. For most, that was like a closet in their dorm, and sit in there with no stimulation for 30 minutes. And a lot of them came back and said, I had, X, Y, and Z problems going on in my life. I figured out how to fix those within that 30 minutes of doing nothing.
Yeah.
And I remember trying that like the first time. I was like, try just simply doing nothing. And it was wild to me that it's like, I can't remember. It's probably been years since I've done nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember it was so anxiety inducing at first. It was crazy. But then once I got comfortable with it, it was like I just kind of let my brain wander. It was like, it was so cool. And similar to the experiences that these students had was I started, kind of naturally thinking about some issues or problems, and I was able to kind of think through them and come up with potential solutions. And it wasn't just on that. It was like, I got to think about like exciting things going on in my life. And I just ended up like, even just 30 minutes felt like forever the first time I did that. It was really, really nice. And I do now make a point to do that, as often as possible, multiple times a week.
Did you start out with 30 minutes off the rip?
I use 30 minutes because that's, I don't know. I'm not really a hard number with that, but it was probably close to 30 minutes the first time. It was crazy.
That's hard.
Yeah, I was a wreck at first.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have any stimulation.
Right. Yeah, because that like we all get into those stimulus response loops. And so like if we're always reacting and responding to something, and that's what our like nervous system is used to too, that can be really scary and anxiety provoking to then not be in the same loop that you've been in for most of your days, weeks, months, years.
Right. Ever since I got a smartphone.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was talking, like, funny enough, I was talking to my counselor about this of like my desire for quiet time was like continuing to have a realization that there is almost no time, like ever, like you said, that I'm not being stimulated by something, and it's usually sound. And it's like there's just constantly, it is just a very loud world. And it reminded me, and I brought it up to her talking about it, but I had a teacher in college. I don't remember what the class was, probably psychology, but the assignment was like, try to go, like, obviously you can answer the phone or something you need to, but try to go 24 hours without some sort of like stimulus. Like you can like do stuff, but like don't be on your phone, don't be on your computer, don't watch TV, kind of like try not to listen to the radio. Like don't try to use a form of direct entertainment like that for like 20, just see how long you can go. Like try to go 24 hours. And I remember the thing that broke mine, like just trying it. And it was like, I'd gone a couple hours. There's like hanging out in my room, like reading a book or something that was like acceptable, just like not something like a TV. And I went to get gas and there was a fucking TV on the gas pump that was like playing commercials.
Where you're like,
yeah, exactly. I was like, yes, give it to me. I need it to, but you just start to realize that like, yeah, like at every step, like if I, get up and I go to the gym. Loud music playing.
Yeah.
I'm probably playing my own music. There's 37 TVs around. Okay. Then it's like, after that, I'm going to get in my car. The radio is going to be playing or some kind of music's going to be playing. Then I'm going to go home. I'm probably going to, listen or do something. And then it's like, I'm going to get back in the car. I'm going to stop at a gas station, which is going to have TVs on the gas pumps and music playing and TVs inside. And then you just kind of start to sit there and realize that there's just like, wow, there is just not much time, that there is not a bunch of like stimulating things happening all the time, and like a desire to just kind of like quiet things down for a while. And so my best friend has been noise canceling headphones. So it's like I'll do like noise canceling headphones and like a book, and I'll face like, because Laura will watch TV, and I'll face with my back to the TV.
Yeah, you got
and then I'll like, because it's like, and I can't hear it, I can't see it. It's just my book, my wife in front of me. Well, and she is stimulating, you know what I'm saying? But visually, you know what I mean? Because she's hot. But she's a beautiful lady.
What else?
So, but no, the point being is, it's like and that's the thing I think that's crazy about it too, is like, I've had to manufacture silence.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't just exist, really.
There's so many electronics. You need more electronics to silence
Literally,
the electronics.
because and it was before, because luckily Laurel has like AirPod Maxes, like the big old things, and their noise canceling is like crazy. But before, I was just like, I remember it happened in the car. Laurel and I were headed to Broken Bow, and I wanted to read, but I'm somebody who, if I can hear words, like audible words, I can't read and hear words.
I can't either.
I like it. It's just too distracting.
It's
for
hard
me.
to do when you're driving.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I've got my eye mask on, so I can't see, and it's like, this
We
car
didn't
drives
make it.
itself. But Laurel was driving. But I just remember like. And she wasn't even listening to anything crazy. She was listening to like a book on tape, right? So it wasn't like she was like blaring music, but it was like, I'll usually try to listen to like, I would listen in this moments like to like lo-fi beats or something that doesn't have words, But then I realized in the car, I had to have the volume up on my headphones all the way up to like, I had to blast music into my brain that didn't have words to thus give myself silence. And I'm like, this is dumb. You know what I mean? But it's like, I can't be like, hey, babe, don't listen to anything while you're driving
Okay,
4
thanks.
hours so that I can read my book. You know what I mean? But it's like, I'm realizing I'm having to like, I'm not silencing it, I'm blurring it. And it's like, that's not really doing what I want it to do from like a brain standpoint, I think. And then, I put on her noise canceling headphones. So it was like AirPod Max, and I click the button and it's like the whole world goes, whoop. And you're like,
This is it.
wait a minute. I can't hear anything. Like, okay. And so my go-to now is like, I'll either just like listen to nothing, but they aren't perfect, but I'll listen to like rain sounds. And so it's just like, okay, like this is like, I can have it on the lowest volume. It then mutes out everything. And it's just, like nice calming rain sounds. And like that I can deal with. Like that's totally fine, but yeah, it's a lot better than me like blasting music to not hear a TV. And I'm like, this is not like, I'm not manufacturing this well. But yeah, very interesting of like, you just start to realize that like, there's just music and sounds and TVs and everything just everywhere all the time.
Minus the shower thoughts. Those are a real thing. Get a lot. That's because there's not a lot of stimulus. Or like right before you're about to fall asleep, I figured some shit out right when I'm half asleep, and I'm like, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
I love going to bed before I'm tired because it gives me, 10, 15 minutes where I'm just laying there and I just let my mind wander. I heard one thing one time too from a guy that struggled to fall asleep, and he was struggling because he felt like he was being kept up by his thoughts. So he was trying to not think about so much before bed to stimulate. And then one night he tried, screw it, I'm just going to let my mind wander, and passed out within 10 minutes.
Yeah. It's kind of like emotions. Like if you stuff those things down long enough, like there's a message to be heard one way or the other, and it's going to come out. It's whether you're wanting to hear it now or later, and like you're gonna hear it. So like I love that because it's like the same kind of concept.
I think that was the first time that I like sat and did nothing. Like where usually, I would, if I was getting into bed, Alyssa usually falls asleep before I do, sometimes earlier on, maybe the TV would be on. We don't do that anymore. Sometimes I'd be on my phone. I don't do that anymore. And sometimes I'd read. And I was like, finally one time I was like, I'm just going to do nothing. I'm like, I am 100% not tired. Alyssa's asleep. I'd probably stay up another, 30 minutes or so. I'm just going to turn the lights off, lay in bed and just kind of hang out. And it's like, I started freaking out immediately.
Yeah. Yes.
Hindsight. Yeah. I probably should have said it at like, hey, just do like 10 minutes and then open up a book or something. It's like, but I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking about it. It's like 30 minutes of doing nothing. Like that's not anything. Like that's crazy. But like you saying that now, having that reaction now makes me realize it's like, that's probably why I got really anxious.
Yeah. Well, you think about just like the loop, like you were talking about earlier, of like just doom scrolling when it's like you just open up a social media thing. I do this so much where it's like I read in bed. That's what I like to do before I go to sleep. It's like very calming for me. It's very nice, but it's like I will pick my phone up to set my alarm.
Oh yeah,
and I'll be like Instagram. An hour later, I'm like, shit.
Don't even realize it. It's so automatic.
It's crazy. And you're just like, all right.
Right.
And I literally have to be like, no, put your freaking phone down, dude. Like, it's crazy. You like start to realize like truly, and I know there was been a bunch of stuff to like documentaries and stuff that have come up, but like literally how addicting these things are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
I mean, these days I think it's like everyone's pacifier, so that they don't have to deal with the now adult thoughts and feelings that you're having, and you can stay in the loop that you're used to being in all day long.
Right.
It's like how drugs are used to distract from reality.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, anything that you don't do in moderation, that's how that's used. Yeah, I think.
Right.
But like also like I'm guilty of this too. I started playing Boggle right before bed because that's an app now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is great. This is really soothing. I can just chill out and find words. And now I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and an app I hadn't pulled up in 5 years, but here we are. And it's just like, how?
What did I do to get here?
I'll probably be getting down a rabbit hole too much here, so we can go away from this. But that has been the like. I was in my head, I call it the keys to success. And it's like, they always talk about that before a hockey game. Like tonight's keys to success are going to be the turnovers, limiting turnovers. Like, okay, yeah, but that's always, but anyway, my key to success, literally the only key to success any day that I have where it's just me and I get to knock out work is just anytime you have to go to social media to check a message or reference something, or because I have to go to social media for a decent amount of my responsibilities, my work, avoid scrolling. If you find yourself scrolling, get out immediately or just try and avoid it completely. And if I can successfully do that, I will have an extremely productive day. It's crazy. It's the only thing I have to do. I'll find stimulation with the work that I've got.
Right.
So.
Right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So doing this, how like, first off, congratulations on your candidacy, because I know that's a big deal. Tests and studying and school and all sorts of things to get there. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
How, after kind of getting all of these things kind of culminated together, how has, getting to do some of this been so far?
Oh my gosh. So fulfilling. So fulfilling. Like it's really just affirmed that I made the right choice. Like
That's
this
good
is
news.
where I
This
feel
far
like
in.
I'm meant to be right now. Otherwise, I would just push through, I guess. No, because that's what I was going to do with strength and conditioning, because that was clear very early on that was not where I was meant to be. And I just kept trucking along anyway until I got slapped in the face. With my own mental health stuff. And I was like, nope, don't do that anymore. But yeah, it's been very fulfilling. I mean, even through school, like I had a 100-hour practicum. I had a 600-hour internship. Like I've been doing the work already. So this is just continuing what I already started.
Right.
And I mean, even then when I was doing it then, like I'm still a baby therapist, but I was like infant therapist when I like first started doing that stuff. But even then, just so fulfilling because this is what I've been told a lot, but I'm really, really starting to feel it now. They tell, especially baby therapists, like, you just being there in the room with someone, actually giving a shit about someone, knowing how to actively listen, because that's a skill. And I had literally had a whole course over how to actively listen in grad school.
Whoa.
And it's called like basic counseling skills, because it's a skill and you have to practice it. I digress, or we can get on that later. But like going through that stuff, and like just even being there in a room with someone, and even though I'm sitting there like, oh my God, I'm the adult here. Like, oh my God, like I'm like, your care is in my hands. But at the end of the day, like being that human for another human alone, not even having other therapy skills, which you need them, but still, if those for some reason were off the table, just being able to provide that service to someone else in general is so fulfilling. Which, I mean, people find that in everyday life too, with just like being the caring friend, cousin, mother, daughter, like whatever it is. And so now just like being able to make a career out of that, like it blows my mind. Like every day I'm still like, wait, this is my job? I get to do this as a job? Like this is the shit. Like this is awesome. But yeah, cool. It's great. And just because like, I mean, my whole life, I mean, this is a lot of people's story too, especially like if you're in like the helping professions, but I've been so curious about everything. Like the amount of whys I would ask like through childhood and in adulthood, just like wanting truly to understand like what the hell is going on in there and then there, like what, and then there, like what, like that, there's some messed up shit in there and also some great shit in there. And like, I want to know all about it. And it's like that, like, natural inclination I had, like with curiosity, like, and also getting to like play that out also professionally of like, this is also personally how I feel really jives with who I like feel like I am as a person. Like getting to do that professionally too is just like, it's mind blowing.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah. I feel like, you know, if you are, like you said, just being there, I feel like for anybody, you know what I mean? Like, even for the girls that we've coached or that I've been able to help with and stuff like that, is like literally just being there. Like, like they're having a tough day and like they come to practice and like you can make it fun, or, you know, like you could tell something's going on and just kind of being there for them. Like it's amazing how much like that can make a difference. I feel like in somebody's life, especially if, you know, like just in general, but it's like if people don't have that, how hard it can be when people, because there are situations, and I've learned more and more of this as I've like gotten older and like found friends in all different like areas, is like, what's the right way to put this? Sometimes people just don't know that something's not okay.
Yeah.
You know, that like this isn't normal. Like this isn't what should be happening. And sometimes just the validation that like your thoughts of thinking that this isn't okay is correct. Like I can't tell you how many times like in my own experience with counseling, my counselor just being like, shouldn't say this, but to paraphrase, like, yeah, Thomas, that's fucked up. It's me being like, thank you so much. Like, cool. So I'm not like crazy for thinking that's not right. Like, you shouldn't do that. And they're like, no, yeah, you shouldn't do that. That's fucked up. You know, it's like, okay, cool. Like, wow, actually, that just made me feel a ton better. There's still plenty to unpack there, I'm sure. But just that like a validation of somebody who listens to people like with messed up problems be like, yes, you qualify for the messed up. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I feel so much more validated just in that like small moment. And it's like, you know, obviously that takes like skills, and her and I have done a bunch of different things to work on stuff, but it's like just being there even for like a friend who are like, hey, like that's not okay. Like, like that person should not be trying to like have you sign over your house to them for no money. Like, what are you talking about? You know? And they're like, wait, I thought that was weird. And you're like, yeah, dude, that's so weird.
Yeah.
I know I've had that, and you and Alyssa are probably my therapists. Now I can officially use that term now that I know that. You don't need a license. But I know like there'll be times where I'm frustrated at something, but I have to check myself with you guys and I've done this a number of times of like, all right, like I'm venting, you know, I just need to kind of like just be mad about this, and you know, someone else is doing something, and I have to look at you guys and I'm like, am I being an asshole right now? And I genuinely mean that question of like, fuck, like I need to take a step back. Like maybe I'm just like,
am I just hungry?
Right. And there,
yes.
And, yeah, sometimes that's the answer. But there's definitely been some times where you're like, you or her are, I think you're just mad right now. You probably need to, you know, cool off and then think about this later, you know, whatever you need to do. But then there's other times where it's like, no, like you're justified in being mad. Like don't handle it while you're mad. Like, But yeah, no, I having to try and like check myself sometimes of like, okay, am I being over dramatic? Am I just in the way that I'm thinking right now? So,
yeah. And that too, like that's a skill. Not a lot of people have that skill to also reach out to social support in general, to want to know, like, is there more to the story here than what's coloring my vision? Which it's like that, like, not to get too therapy, but like there's a therapy out there called dialectical behavioral therapy. And that's something very well known in that realm. It's called wise mind thinking, which is having a balance between the emotion side of things and the logic side of things, like brain system wise. So obviously if like emotion's too high, logic's probably going to be lower. And then vice versa. You don't want to be too logical and intellectual because we're all emotive beings. So you want to have some kind of wise mind. So it sounds like that example was like, all right, I'm feeling the emotion side getting a little higher. Like you were able to then implement your own tool to see if you could level out to a wise mind.
I can tell you why I do that now is because I have been an asshole in the past and I was called out after the fact by Alyssa and Thomas. So now I'm like, I'm trying to avoid that.
Well, I do think that is something that like, to, you know, pat ourselves on the back a little bit. I do think that is one thing that we do really well, or I think that you and I do really well. And hopefully it's translated to like managers and other people, but a very acceptable answer when like an employee has done something to like, you know, because it's like, hey, XYZ employee did this, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Well, you know, like as part of a business, a part of the responsibility is like, okay, like how did we handle it? And we have been very good that an acceptable answer is, I was much too upset to talk to them in the moment. I will talk to them tomorrow. And it'd be like, cool, I get it. You know what I mean? And not be like, no, you should have handled it in the moment. You got to deal with this stuff. It's like, no. I would have murdered this person. So I did not, because I would have come in way too hot. I would have come in at a 9 and I need to come in at a 3 to actually get some like success from this so that we can have the best and they can have the best. Like, and so that I do think like I am proud of the fact that that is something that is a very accepted, like, no, this was not the moment mentally for me to handle this. I'm much too emotional. I'm much too angry or whatever, but I will come back to it as soon as I can, where I can come at this from a good, like logical controlled perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that shit's hard.
Oh yeah.
That shit's hard.
When there is like fire in my eyes and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Yep. Perfect.
Yeah. Talk about a learned skill. Like that also takes practice to do.
Or enough times we screwed it up that way. We're
That's practice, right?
That counts. Right?
Sure does. Sure does. Yeah. So, you know, getting back to, you know, especially like the sports side of things, what are some of the things that you feel like you do with people or like help in the sense of, I know we talked about more of like immediate, like short term might not be like the prettiest light to paint it in, but the point of it is being like, hey, let's like, we need to perform, so like we don't have time to break open all these wounds. Like let's work on some stuff like more in the immediate to get us back to a performance level.
Yeah, so that would be more so like mental skills training or psychological skills training. Those are interchangeable. So that's more so like it's definitely less counseling and more so in the realm of like life coaching, which like I hate to like name it that, but like if you want to get technical, that's what it is, because it's me providing psychoeducation and not necessarily like getting a ton of client narrative or digging into really deep stuff. It's kind of like presenting anxiety versus arousal control. imagery, self-talk, confidence, goal setting, like habit formation, like all of those things, or resiliency, mental toughness. Like I could keep going. There's a bazillion different mental skills that can be trained. It's like, so mental skills training really falls under like those kinds of categories. I'd say like here, I'll give an example of like what I've done with mental skills versus like mental health counseling with a client. So a really popular one is...
What was their name?
It was... and they live at... so like a really popular one for mental skills training is anxiety and arousal control. Because I'd say like across the board again, performance anxiety. And so that's learning like where is your optimal zone of functioning. So it's like IZOF and it's called like the inverted U hypothesis, which is... Here, do I paint it this way or this way? Where like on one end is like not aroused, not excited enough. And then on the other end is like, I'm uber excited to the point of like anxiety.
Right.
But at the top of that inverted U is like the optimal zone for you of where you're just excited enough.
Right.
To where you're ready to perform. Because think about it, like if you didn't feel some kind of anxiety before you performed, how good of a performance is that even going to be? Or even like for work, if you don't feel some kind of excitatory something to work, how good of a work day is that going to be?
I remember my coach in high school would always be like, you don't have a look in your eye like you're ready to play. Like you look like you're tired. Like you look like you're just like lethargic.
Right. Like you don't have enough alertness and excitement to get your body in a place ready to like, you do need muscle tension. Like you do need some of that stuff to perform until it gets to a dysfunctional place where like, all right, you're over the gap now. We're into anxiety where it's like, that is performance dysfunction at that point in time. So teaching athletes too, like, where do you fall on that? Because everyone has their own personal zone. There are some people that like, I listen to jazz music before I go out on the field and it's really chill and like, I'm good to go. Or like, I had an athlete one time, it was like this little freshman girl that was just like, I love pick squeal and like screamo metal stuff. Like I'm jumping around, like getting going. And like, for a lot of people, that might turn them into like way past their zone.
Right.
Like, and for her, it was like, that got her in her optimal, like ready to go.
So would those people naturally be like overly excited, so I have to listen to, like I naturally, maybe deal with a little bit more performance anxiety, so I have to listen to calming music, where in the opposite example, it would be I typically don't get excited enough just going into something that if I listen to some hype up music, that would get me.
Yeah.
Is that...
It can be, which it's like, this is also the most therapy response ever. It depends. It depends. But I would say like more times than not, but it also does depend. There are, I would say, a lot of athletes too, at least the ones that I've worked with, that don't even know what their zone is. Like don't even like what is, well, I don't know. I'm just feel anxious every time I perform. Like I don't even know what it feels like to feel like in my zone. And so it's a lot of it's just teaching them what that even is. And like for some people, it's like, my zone, like you like start taking stock in yourself and observing, like it takes me an hour to warm up to feel like I'm in my zone, versus someone that's like, I need to warm up for 2 minutes tops. Otherwise I'm going to start thinking too much and I am out of my zone. So like there's just a bunch of little details like that, and all those can add up. So I've spent a lot of time, like multiple sessions trying to help athletes figure out like, where's your zone? What are things that contribute to getting into your zone? What are things that contribute to knocking you out of your zone? Like I had a client one time that was like, if I don't have my headphones in to block out my parents' voices, I will get knocked out of my zone. And that was something very specific, but it was something potent enough that I was like, well, hey, this last game that you had, did you have your headphones in on the way to the game? I did. I had a great game. And it's just like, but they found that out on their own, but also that was from figuring out those really tiny details.
So many aspects come into play with getting in your zone, I'm sure. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like such an important aspect to that too is confidence building. I've done my things. I've done the things that I know I need to do to get there. Like
to have a successful game.
Right. Like I had my headphones. I ate what I was supposed to eat. I feel prepared. I feel confident in my preparation because that's cool, because I do feel like sometimes some of those things could potentially look or feel from like an external, like kind of ritualistic, when more they're like, no, I'm trying to be in my zone. And it's like, I know if I have this, and this, I should be in there. And now I'm confident that I'm going to get there.
Yeah, and that's a good way of explaining how all of these mental skills end up blending together.
Right.
Because like building performance routines, that's a big mental skill in and of itself. But see how those like get super intertwined, especially with confidence too. If I know I'm executing my performance routine, which is part of me getting into my zone, then I have belief in myself to execute the skills that I know how to execute. Or like I have belief in the automaticity of movement that you have to have if you're performing. I think that's a big one too, because if you start thinking too much, you're not.
Idiot.
Spell it.
AUTO.
And that's it.
I don't know what
And that's how I pronounce it to my clients. But we all know what we're talking about. No, but like the fluid movement, like you're not thinking about like, oh, I need to put like my hand here, my head here, this, I need to look this way. Like once you start doing that, like you're done.
Right.
You're toast. Like, oh my gosh, I remember when this is a little tangent, but I remember when I was first learning how to Olympic lift and I was thinking about all the little tiny details I needed to do.
think of a golf swing.
Yes, yes. And just dropping a barbell on top of me because I was thinking about it too much. Just thinking about it too much.
At least dropping a golf club on you is not so bad.
It can hurt.
Yeah.
That's true. It could hit somebody in the crowd with a ball. That could be bad. That could be real bad. It reminded me earlier that Jordan Spieth's caddy. Have you heard that story? Have either of you guys heard this story? So Jordan Spieth, he's a player in the PGA. Yeah. So he's got a caddy that he got assigned when he was playing some like small charity tournament. I don't think it was a PGA event or anything. So really small, just doing it for fun. Got assigned. He was like a grade school teacher that knew enough about golf to volunteer as a caddy, but obviously not like PGA level caddy by any means. But Jordan Spieth had such a good game because he was so calming and relaxing, and I would assume helped Jordan get into his zone and play such a good game that he hired him full time. I think he still is caddy today.
That's crazy.
Wow.
He won the Masters with that caddy.
That's awesome.
So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was like a totally underqualified guy, but he was just like, when I'm around you, I'm in my zone. So,
well,
That's amazing.
It's funny too because I feel like there's so many things that obviously get involved in that, and like one of the big ones that I've personally done is like working with a team is girls that we can sense with different teams, and you coach enough players or enough people in different things. I coach in jiu-jitsu as well, is when people start to have negative self-talk or you can tell that their confidence isn't there. My favorite technique for that is it might not be right, but it's something that seems like it's worked like on the external level, is to like make saying I suck silly, like making it funny.
Yeah.
And so like one of the things like I'll tell all the girls on the volleyball team, like they'll play really well and they'll go and we'll kind of huddle after like a set, and they would have just like crushed somebody. Like you've seen us play sometimes. We will crush teams at times. And then they can kind of let the foot off the gas and we get into that kind of rhythm. And my favorite thing is I'll just be like, hey, we suck. Okay. You suck extra. Like you double suck, you all suck. And they'll all just laugh. And then they'll be like,
you sound like a great coach.
Yeah. And they'll be like, Thomas, oh, we think you suck too. And I'll be like, oh, thanks girls. Like you guys are so nice. But we do that in while it's like funny and silly, is like, my goal is like, if I do that enough with you and I say that enough and I make it to where you hearing you suck, or we'll even like break out of a huddle and be like, all right, I suck on 3. 1, 2, 3, I suck, and it's like all the parents, we had to be like, hey, we're not actually, and they're like, I think we get it, but it's like, hopefully when you get that thought in your head of like, I suck, maybe you'll laugh. Maybe it'll change a connection in your brain that saying I suck, or feeling that I suck, or somebody else telling you you're not good, that like you'll now associate that with something different than like making you feel worse.
Right.
And so it's like we've done that a bunch, where it's just like a joking thing of, it's just like, if I can say this enough jokingly, when maybe they say it to themselves, maybe it'll be a joke again. Like,
right. Well, it's like assigning a different narrative to it, maybe one they haven't been exposed to yet.
Right.
Because like it's in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called thought stopping. I freaking hate it because I personally think it's dumb. But it's like, if you get a thought like, I suck, let's say that's your thought that you're like, I want to stop that. I don't want to think that anymore. Like, thought stopping is coming up with like imagery of like a hand or a stop sign, or like you clap your hands and that's your signal to like stop the thought. I think that's not really realistic, especially if you're like in the moment. That's why I love that. Because like realistically, especially if that's a thought that you've been having for many, many, many years over many repetitions, it's not just going to up and stop because you clap your hands or like, you know, have different imagery with it, which that can work over time. It takes a long time though. But having a different narrative assigned to it, I think that's maybe even a quicker way to work with it rather than like against it.
Right. Like we win games and we're like, we suck. It's like, yeah, we suck. Like, and they'll be like, you suck and you suck. And it's like, cool. Like, let's do that. They're like,
you said thought stopping is something that is like a strategy that other counselors are using though.
Yeah. It's like a well-known one in cognitive behavioral therapy. And I just think it's dumb. I just personally hate it. I might get a lot of flack for that, but like, I just think it's dumb.
We have dozens of viewers.
To be fully honest, I
They're
think
gonna hate me.
I think I do that a lot myself, which is interesting because like
the thought stoppage?
I think so, or at least like attempt to. Yeah, I know. So no. Like it's something like I'm glad you brought it up because it's like I didn't know there was a name to it. It was just, but like I'll find myself like my brain kind of going into like negative thoughts of like, you know, what if you don't get as much done as you're supposed to get? Or what if you don't get all your work done, you know, in time today? Or what if this doesn't go right? And I like have to like, I'm hoping it's okay. It gives me a little validation that some people are using the strategy. So,
no. Yeah, I mean, if it works for you, like don't like, then it's working for you. I just personally don't like teaching it if someone's never used it before, because I think there's other interventions out there that are more potent. But if you're already using it and it works, then like, hell yeah, brother, go in.
No, and it's like, but that's cool to know too, that it's like, I don't have to, like, if it doesn't work, that there are other avenues too of like, okay, like if you don't get your work done today, like what's the worst that can happen? Like I can associate that with like, okay, well then I'll stay up a little late on the couch and watch Friends or something like that. So like, oh, that'll be nice. So, but yeah, I've noticed that I've done that, especially over last like year or so, that like if I start to kind of get into like start to have like, well, what if this negative thing happens? To be quite honest, like in my head is what I tell myself every time. It's like, shut the fuck up. And I don't think
oh, that's called shut the fuck up therapy. Yeah, that's a little different.
It's a different intervention. I haven't learned that one yet. That's fine.
Well, this is why I tell you suck all the time. We'd laugh. Kevin sucks.
Well, you might have changed my mind, so thank you.
No, it seems to work. I haven't. So, and I've done it for like maybe like a year. So, but I am curious on what you think about like negative self-talk as like either as like reassigning the narrative or even kind of like to be humble. Cause you know, I heard someone talking about it earlier today where like how detrimental that can be. I'm just curious what your thoughts on it. Cause like I do that a lot to try and keep a humble mindset. And I'm like, am I screwing myself up by doing that? Or
that's a fine balance. Yeah. That's a fine balance. And it depends. But
it's not a black and white.
It's not a black and white. I don't think so. I think other people may argue with me about that. But like, I don't know, like, I think a personal example, like when I'm lifting and I'm not really as motivated, but I like want to and need to get a lift done, sometimes I'm like, don't be a fucking pussy.
Yeah, right.
Like, I tell myself that a lot too.
Lift this, just lift this weight. Like that's your biggest enemy right now. Like let's freaking go. And like to me, for that, like that's not detrimental to me. Like I've heard that in my head so many times that it's like, it doesn't feel demeaning. It feels like it's motivating. Right. Like that's what's pushing me. But I think there's a difference too between that and like, I'm never going to lift this. Or see, you weren't good enough. Yeah. Or like, you know, I'm not that guy. Or
I
like
always associate it with like, when you do fail, does that just bust open the floodgates? Like, do you just like really let yourself have it then? Where it's like, that's kind of how I will do negative self-talk as I'm performing something, and it's funny, I'll be like, don't be a fucking pussy, Thomas.
Right.
Lift that shit. And then I don't, and I go, oh well. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, it didn't matter that much. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, that's like whoop-de-doo, you know, and I can walk away from it. But I know that there's people that are like, okay, I'm a fucking failure. Like, I suck.
Yeah,
like,
that's
okay,
different.
I'm never, like you said, I'm not that guy. I'm never going to be that guy, like kind of thing.
I think it's different when there is identity attached to it. And those definitely sound different too. Like I'm not that guy. Or like if you're saying like, oh yeah, I am a pussy. That's different than like, let's fucking go. Like that's very different.
I feel like that's a difference of like, I'm a fucking pussy, or hey, don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
Like, I believe I'm not. Let's make sure I'm not.
Right.
So,
yeah.
My counselor, she described that one time like as like two different things. I don't remember exactly the way that she described it, but one is exactly that, where it's like, you know, in this moment, what's the right way to put this? Where it's like the difference between I'm feeling this thing or like I'm observing this in myself right now versus this is me. This is my part of my identity, where it's like this is, and it was a way she was describing like different kinds of like self-talk stuff where it's like being hard on yourself and then like attaching it to yourself, like is a big difference.
Yeah.
How do you separate self-awareness and like self-given identity that may not even be true?
Yeah, I think like the difference, if this is what you're saying, I think the difference is like I failed and I'm a failure. Like those are different things. Like one is like I failed. That's okay. I can move on. I can try again. I am a failure is now part of Thomas. That is who I am forever.
Yeah.
I am a failure forever now.
Plus like that word I am, that's pretty permanent. Not a lot of wiggle room in that kind of verbiage. And also I think a really good question to also figure out if something is like that way or not. How is this serving me? Like I failed. How is this serving me? Oh, I failed. That sounds like there's a little bit of wiggle room for me to not always have to fail versus like I am a failure. How is that serving me? Like is that pushing me to be better, or is that like fulfilling, or is it a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, yeah, I always thought I was a failure.
Yeah.
Again, always is very permanent language too.
How does this talk result in the, like, what does that mean in the future? That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm curious on your perspective of things like the almost the other direction, because I feel like it is something that does get glamorized at times when I think in like actuality, it's potentially not so great, where it's like Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, probably not real fun to hang out with though. You know what I mean? Where it's like he's so competitive that it's like you play golf with him, you better be ready to put 10 grand on every hole because he has to be a competition for him. Or those people who are like ultra like successful in a lot of things, but it's like they gave so much to making their business so successful that they couldn't have a family. They couldn't maintain those kind of things. It's like the ultra successful, and not that everybody, you know, that's ultra successful is like that, but it's like a lot of those, like, to be the best in the world, you have to have this like,
there's not a lot of balance.
Yeah. You have to have this like mentality where you're just like, man, you're just not real fun. Like, man, Michael, I don't know if I want to play board games, like, because you're going to cause a fight, you know, like kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel, you know, obviously working with athletes, because I do feel like that is something the ultra competitive athlete can get glamorized, when in reality, I feel like there is a lot underneath that's probably not as bueno.
Yeah, I think it depends.
Yeah, right.
I knew it.
Because it depends what their meaning and purpose behind their life is.
Sure.
If their meaning and purpose is to be the best athlete at all costs, all right.
Right.
Doing
Then
well.
I will help you do that at whatever cost. Or is your meaning and purpose to be the best friend, be the best brother, be the best teammate, like whatever that is for you. But you also then have to know what your personal meaning and purpose is, and that you're not living out someone else's. And that's deeper work, but I think that's deeper work that is absolutely pivotal in being not only the athlete you want to be, but like the person that you want to be. And as cheesy as that is, like that's needed.
Right. Like one of the things that, and why this like came to mind for me, is I was having a conversation with my chiropractor who I do jujitsu with as well. And he asked me like if I was planning on competing anytime soon. And I was like, I like competing, but like, it's not always my favorite thing. You know what I mean? Because when it comes to jujitsu, like the best story that I can always use is my last jujitsu competition. I was in the finals and had a specific move where I'm essentially attacking this guy's like rotator cuff and elbow, right? It's an Americana. You're like bending the arm backwards against their will. Not real fun.
Just gonna slide that.
And when I did that, I was doing the move and his elbow popped louder than like, and it's like right in my face too. So it's like his elbow, like, and I'm like, I literally let off and I go, are you okay?
Oh my God.
And he's like, yeah, I think I'm okay. And I'm like, okay. And I kind of like go and like kind of just like take the sweep as opposed to just like finishing the submission. And I ended up losing the match, where it's like, if I would have thrown into that all day, that dude probably, like, there's a decent chance that dude had to have like surgery. Like there's something went wrong. Right.
Yeah.
And this is like, it's something that, you know, I realize about myself, and especially in that moment, I'm like, oh, I won't sacrifice winning for hurting somebody. And like, and I'm okay with that. That's personally. Cool. Right. Like I'm personally okay with that. And it was a cool thing because I did have a lot of people that I respect really highly were watching, and a lot of them, understanding jiu-jitsu very well, saw exactly what happened and were like, I learned a lot about you today, Thomas. And like, I want you to know how much like I appreciate you for being that kind of person. And I'm like, yeah, no, for sure. It wasn't on purpose. Like, it's just, that was my natural reaction, you know?
Yeah.
And there's always the other side of things where it's like physically, and for where I'm at talent-wise level, like I could probably compete at a pretty high level, but I don't have that like step on your throat, win by any means necessary. And the thing that like I was kind of talking to my chiropractor about is the like, while that would be cool, I don't think I could be the teammate that I am now. I wouldn't be the fun role in class anymore. I wouldn't be the, oh, everybody loves coming to roll with Thomas, and like we have such a good time, and like I don't hurt anybody, and like I don't have any of those things. And it's like, for me, there's a very like distinct thing in my mind, at least, when I look at that and I think to myself, like, I don't know if me being the like killer, crush everyone's throat, I don't care, I hope I broke that guy's elbow in this local jiu-jitsu tournament for this $19 medal, and also be the like,
right,
I can roll with the kids and everyone's having fun, and if you're new, roll with Thomas, you're gonna have a blast, like, kind of thing.
Right.
It's like, I don't know if those things can coexist. And I'm sure in somebody they can, and some people they can, but like I don't know if that can in me.
Right.
And so I'm always like kind of curious about like that dynamic, because there is the like push from, and nobody does anything bad, and I do like competing and will, but it is one of where it's like, some people will be like, oh my gosh, Thomas, you should be competing every weekend. And I'm like, like I know
you have
that
a different
like
purpose.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is, and it like, there's also the thing that like sucks to it is like, there are people who like, oh, if I had, you know, Thomas's
skills,
whatever, or, you know, body type, like, man, I would go out and, you know, I could conquer all of my goals and all of my dreams. And Thomas is just kind of like, I don't care. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so it is just like an interesting dynamic though, where it's like, for me, it's like, I'd rather be the good teammate that can go to any other gym, and people, you know, I feel like, especially after that situation at that tournament, where people like, I step into a gym and the gym owner was watching me, they're like, Thomas, yes, come in, please roll with all of my people, you know, where it's like, being the best doesn't, like, if I had that, like, kill them, like, I don't care, like, because there are people in jiu-jitsu, people that I know in jiu-jitsu that I like as people, but when you get on the mats with them, they will hurt you because they don't know how to not be that person. They don't know how to not think that this is the world championship, and every roll they roll is like that. So I know that was a lot there, but it is just like an interesting thing that has like come to my mind lately, where it's just kind of like, yeah, I just don't know if I could. In my chiropractor brought up like Michael Jordan being like, yeah, but like, I don't think Michael Jordan's cool, but I don't think you want to be Michael Jordan's friend, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and there are situations like that where it's kind of, it might be like, yeah, pick your poison.
Right.
Which one do you want to be? And I think you made a good point too. There are some people out there that maybe have practiced and have found that space where they can be both, but I think that's more of a rarity than like kind of what you're talking about. I mean, it's just like when you're showing up in a relationship with someone else, like there's going to be compromises and sacrifices, just like relationship with sport. There's going to be compromises and sacrifices, like again, with identity and purpose and meaning. And those are deep, but still, those are things that you have to think about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That'll, you having that experience reminded me of hunting with my grandpa, where he had always had a saying that people will respect you more for the shots that you don't take than for the shots that you do take. Of like, if you're going to take a risky shot on an animal, you're better off just avoiding it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a good point. Right. Cause it's like, yeah, no, I'm happy. I wouldn't have it any other way. You know what I mean? And I think that it's like the acceptance of like, am I ever going to be a world champion? Probably not. And I'm okay with that. Like, that's not like anything that I'm sitting here like, oh no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is like an interesting dynamic of like how be like working in the things that you do. I could also see where somebody who is ultra competitive to a point of competitiveness, I don't want to like paint as a negative thing, but maybe have that like, I can't turn this off, like kind of thing. What, you know,
becomes probably harder and harder, I would assume. Like you said, it was, it's possible to do both things, but a rarity.
Right.
And I would assume that it's like, maybe not everybody's even able to do both.
Right.
But even if you can, it's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it like, you made a good point too, again, about like, am I happy for one thing? And I think another point to add to that too is like, is what I'm doing right now healthy for me? Because I even had a client in the past where highly competitive, super good at their craft, and was shit at teammate relationships, coach relationships, and ref relationships, which is all of them are crucial if you want to be part of a team. And so we actually did work on that. What is that fine balance between you being healthy and happy with your level of competitiveness, and considering you're on a team sport where you do indeed have to consider the relationship that you have with other people, and finding, you know, a lot of that too was just like emotion regulation work and like not even realizing what it felt like to go off the handle and then reel yourself back in. So maybe that's kind of a different story, but that's what it reminded me of.
No, I think that's a good point though, where it's just kind of like, I'm sure the work with somebody with like that more looks like, hey, you know, emotionally regulate to like what is important and what's not. Like, you know, I know, but like this game of bridge with your grandma isn't something to scream about. You know, like there's
every time, man.
Yeah, there's things that you can do that make it to where you don't have to take everything in that thing without, because I do think there's an aspect where potentially people feel like they're going to lose their competitive edge because they're not ultra competitive all the time. And it's like, no, that's a switch you can control.
Right. I actually think I learned that recently in CrossFit when I attempted to do CrossFit. Of like competitive with myself.
Right.
Like I didn't give a shit if I beat anyone else or not. But like I was like, I need to be able to do this in this amount of time, and like pushing myself to the point of injury. It's like, well, maybe I should reel myself back in from like how competitive I personally feel happy with being with even something that I'm enjoying doing.
No, 1,000%. I think that's really good perspective for people though too, because like I do think there is a like, especially as you're growing up, like being ultra competitive in sports, like that can be a good thing, but it can also be a detrimental thing life-wise that like you have to, you know.
But even just within sports, like you said with your client, with being on a team, it's like if you want to play in a professional level, like you being ultra competitive can definitely help you, but can also hurt you being on the team. Like I see professionals get let go of teams all the time because they had a bad attitude. It reminds me a lot of even just kind of starting to get into business, because like that's a very competitive thing, and it has to be taken very seriously if you want to even be able to survive. We learned that definitely the hard way with struggling our first handful of years. And that, became kind of like a big goal for me. And it was tough to, and Thomas has some stories I hope he doesn't share. It became tough to keep solid relationships with the people around me and people that had been close friends with me for a long time. But it's really hard to run and grow a business with totally alone. Also not fun. I definitely learned that it is you can make it a lot further if you are able to keep relationships in business, and it is a lot more fun. So it's like, it is legitimately more beneficial for both reasons with the position that I'm in to keep good relationships with the people around, especially with my wife works here. My best friend works here. A lot of my very close friends work here. So
yeah. I would also argue too, that's also a learned skill. Like sometimes you don't even know if you're superb at something or deficient in something, relationally speaking, until you're presented with that. Like how many people are opening businesses? Like how often were you opening businesses your entire life until you did that and knew how to work relationally in that domain with people? Like
stress.
That was the toughest thing I've had to learn, I think. So.
And that it's like those tough exposures like that. Even like my client really started getting competitive into their sport and like had not been exposed to that level of competition before, and found out, I mean, also developmentally speaking, that has implications too. Like they developmentally hadn't even learned some of those skills yet. So it's like, don't even blame you for having responded this way. But then some people find out like, oh, I didn't learn those skills developmentally when I should have. And now I'm an adult and I'm learning it in real time.
In a very highly stressful situation.
Yes, which will just shine the brightest light on that stuff, which is like, that's not a bad thing. It's like, so everyone has those deficits, and just like everyone has different strengths. It's just like those are the situations where you really start learning about them.
Right. And this, again, I think this is like, it's been such a testimony to just in general for why I think counseling in general can be so important, is making even times in my life, times in everyone's life where they feel like they failed, feel not like a failure. You know what I mean? Yeah. It is like learning how, like, by having reassurance and having affirmation in moments, especially when, like, you know, we weren't our brightest. And like you said, everybody goes through that, but it does not feel that way when you go through them. You know what I mean? It feels very lonely. It feels very like, I'm the only person who's ever screwed this up ever in this dynamic. I'm the only one, you know what I mean? And so I think that is such a nice thing, because that's one of the things that I feel like I've learned through my counseling myself, is like handling feeling of regret with, you know, relational things or whatever, but in general of like just having some of the affirmation that like, hey, like, of course you fell short sometimes. You know what I mean? Like you could tell yourself stuff like that, but it is like having, again, somebody else who has a piece of paper on the wall, especially, always kind of makes you feel like a little bit like, okay, like, you know what? Yeah. Like even kind of what she was saying is, it's like, right. Like, yeah, you had struggles, but like, this is your first time opening a business in your life, and then running a business by yourself. And like, you know what? Like at the end of the day, like, messing some stuff up is totally understandable. And the thing, kind of like you were talking about, kind of relates a little bit back to like what your grandpa was saying, was it was like, well, even though we fall short and everyone does, like people forget about that and move past that and have a lot of respect for improvements, right? Like when people take things seriously and work on themselves or whatever, and make that change to not be the person they don't want to be, or whatever that looks like, not specific to you or anybody, but just like, people notice the effort to work on themselves, I think, more than anything. And I think as humans, it's easy to still get caught in that, like, oh, I messed this up, and forget about the change that the work and stuff that they put in. Like, I always bring this back to volleyball because it's just been on my mind a lot. It's like, you can go get like 7 kills or score 7 points and then miss 1 pass, and you got real short-term memory on all the good stuff you did and real long-term memory on the stuff you messed up. And it's like, at the end of the day, that is like, internally, I feel like how a lot of people can train themselves to think and view themselves, but externally, I think most people are remembering your 7 kills, not your 1 missed pass,
Yeah. Those emotions are so potent though. And that's what we remember the most. It's like those negative emotions like live in us, and we don't maybe not even necessarily remember all the memories associated with the experience, but we sure as hell remember how we felt, and like retrospectively speaking. And also, if you haven't worked through that emotion yet, it's still living up in here, and so it's gonna you're still breathing life into it if you haven't worked through the emotional aspect of it too. Something that I heard that I can't claim, but I have loved this, is thinking about like, you did the best you could with who you were at that point in time. So like, that past you only had that information at that point in time. So it's a future you that has now learned exponentially more even from that experience. Like, how dare you beat yourself down like that? Like, you wouldn't do that to a little kid. Why are you doing that to like littler you?
Yeah, you don't judge your 10-year-old self on their ability to drive. You know what I mean? They didn't know how to drive. Like, of course they crashed the lawnmower. You know what I mean? Like,
we're gonna call this episode Thomas and Kevin's therapy session.
Yeah, this is why the camera's not even going. We're just like, we're gonna put the headphones on and everything. Yeah, it'll be good.
I'm learning so much.
But for real though, it's like, I think that's such a good aspect of like, you know what? That's what you had to work with then, and like, like I said, you wouldn't you wouldn't get mad at your 10-year-old self for not knowing how to drive. Like, same thing. It's like, oh, you hadn't learned and worked through all these things, and now it's like, I think especially, even in the situation like that you had brought up, like, not that I think you dwell on those things. I don't think you do, and you shouldn't.
I'm very happy I went through those because I learned a lot.
Right. And look now, you know what I mean? Like, look at like how things are today. Like, I would, and I think you can, like you just said, but it's like, I would take all those things. I would go back and not change anything. You know what I mean? Because like, where things are today are where they should be. You know what I mean? And so I think it, and I think for a lot of people in situations like that, it's like, you find if you do learn from them and you choose to learn and grow and do those kind of things, like, you'll be amazed at what does open up or reopen or whatever, and opportunities and friendships and growth or whatever that is. Like, there's just being willing to, I feel like so much of it in life is just being willing to, again, like, work on yourself. That's why, like, coming back to just like doing counseling or something in the beginning. Like,
well, like, being open to being curious. Like, I'd bring it back to that word too. I do have to say though, I will say one caveat that, like, it does sound nice and dandy to be like, that was the best that you could do in the past. Like, yay. Okay, well, that's part 1 of Wise Mind. That's the intellectual part. That's great. Let's add that in there. And now the emotional part, like, if you're feeling mad regret from that, you still need to work on that emotional part, because that intellectual part can only do so much. So, I mean, even like, you might know what, like, this intervention of like, what would you go back and say to that version of you that you haven't been told yet? Like, imagine yourself sitting down across the room to that person that made that mistake, and you're still feeling that regret. Have a conversation with them. What would you say? And like, that can help move some feelings along. Also, moving your body, being more present in your body can help move some of those feelings along. But I will say, like, being able to process both sides of those things can make it very, very rich.
Yeah. What's that? It was family. What is it called? Family systems?
Oh, internal family systems.
Internal family systems. That was one of the ones that, like, I did with my counselor. Bro.
That's a goodie.
That is some crazy stuff. Like, not in a bad way. Like, it's crazy. Like, it has changed a lot of things in my brain. But a lot of like internal family systems is exactly what she's talking, and she can explain it 10,000 times better than I can. But like literally sitting and like physically having a conversation with yourself, bro. It's like as tough as it is, I think, to explain. She always explained it as like, have you ever seen the movie Inside Out, like the Pixar movie?
I haven't, no.
So it's about just,
I know what it's about.
Yeah, it's like different emotions and different things that kind of like take control. But there's like, essentially, from what at least I understand from internal family systems, is there's like parts of you that can take control too. And it's like talking with those parts. And when like, and my counselor, she would not let me slip up. Like, I had to call myself by my name. Like, I had to, like, childhood Thomas is Tommy. And I have to talk, like, when we would talk to Tommy, I couldn't be like, hey, what's up, me? It's like, nope. Hey, what's up, Tommy? Like, let's have
it has to be third person.
Yeah, like I have to, like, it's just like I'm naming, I'm creating, I'm visualizing. Like, I am having I'm hanging out with a previous version of myself. And like the thing that is like super interesting to it is you can start to, because there's like, I guess a good way to put it is like, if I have these emotions or I have these things that are inside of me, well, then like a part of that version of me lives inside of me still, right? And so having an opportunity to, that version of myself is still living kind of in that moment or in these moments of things that has happened. And like, I can go back and be the adult for myself and talk to myself through those moments. And bro, the stuff that will freaking blow your shorts off is when you're like one of the things that she would have me do is she'd be like, the way she described it is she'd be like, you know, when somebody's telling a story and you've heard it before, she's like, do you like jump in and start telling the story too, or like cut to the end? And I'm like, well, you're talking to me sometimes. I do that, but she's like, no, the idea is like, you still let that person tell the story because it's their story. Right. And she's like, treat it that way too. And then they start telling a different fucking story than you thought they were going to tell. And you're like, okay, well, this is awkward. Dude, like,
it sounds like you're describing like an ayahuasca experience or something.
Yeah, and it's obviously not like this vivid like kind of thing, but it's like, you know, you want to visualize yourself. And I remember like telling a story about being a kid, and like I associated this like certain situation with this like car that I was in all the time, and there's, you know, whatever. But I was like, yeah, you know, I feel like I'm taken back to that moment sometimes. And she's like, okay, well, like, what does Tommy have to say about it, kind of thing? Which I had a very fun time out real quick to that story. I had a very funny moment with my counselor where like afterwards, like we'd finished the session and we had like a couple minutes left, and I was talking to her and I'm like, hey, yo, it's kind of weird though, right? And she's like, oh yeah. She's like, when I try to explain this to somebody, it's like, you feel like you're saying the crazy stuff to them. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you for that validation. And she's like, no. You're taking to it really well. Yeah. People definitely struggle with this because you are like literally talking to yourself and like essentially imagining and making it to be another person in the room. Yeah. She's like, it's not lost on me that this is like weird, you know? And I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you. Cause yeah, it can be weird, but it was like, I always associated this car with this like particular story. And it was kind of like, well, you know, what does Tommy have to say about it? And it was like, okay, you know, and I'm like trying to sit there and I'm getting in my zone, you know what I mean? I got my eyes closed and I'm like, okay, like, Tommy, what do you have to say about it? And it was like, well, when I was in this car, this. And I'm like, that was not what I was thinking at all of associating this. Because so much I'd been conditioned in my brain to associate it with this one event. And there was another event that had happened that was like traumatic for me as a child. And it was like, oh shit, I haven't thought about that in like 10 years.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. I feel like it kind of goes back to what she was saying too, of you can apply as much logic to it as possible, but it's there's a reason it still might fester because we are emotional beings.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense because I feel like I've done that so many times. I'm like, okay, well, logically I shouldn't be upset about this because of that.
Yeah.
But it's still like, why am I still upset about it though?
Oh, yeah.
So it's maybe sometimes I end up naturally working through it, but it I don't know, that clicks a lot for me to realize.
Yeah.
Bro,
that
I
there's-
wrote myself a letter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like,
That's a great intervention. I love that one.
yeah, like I wrote myself a full blown letter, like title, like to him, not written in the first person. Like I was writing a letter to someone else.
Wow.
Rachel read it.
I did, and it was
Yeah.
It was
An ayahuasca experience for you
And
too.
I had one by reading the letter. I was like, damn, little Tommy. I thought he was in the room at that point in time.
But it is like a super interesting thing, and I say all of that, and obviously willing to share it because like it had a profound effect on me.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it genuinely, like the letter specifically was the thing that was like you start to realize like in that moment when you're there and you're because that's a big part of it. You have to like accept the weirdness, right? You have to accept like play along, like humor yourself, like play along with this, and then it's like writing this and and I done it on my own where I wrote it and then like not in a session, but I read it to him. You know what I mean? And when you are materializing this prior version of yourself, you can be really good at telling them the things that they needed to hear. Like if I can provide and be what this version, this human, like this person that like in its own way lives inside of me, like I can be what he needed. And if you do it in the right way and you really, because I'm very big on like, if I'm going to go to this and I'm going to do it, I'm going to take it seriously. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. Like if I go to my physical therapist and he tells me to do workouts and I don't do them, what the fuck's the point? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's just a waste of time and money. But it's like, okay, I'm going to take this serious. I'm going to buy in. I'm going to try it. And it was like, right, like reading that letter to myself, like, literally there is a fork in the road from that moment of like how I felt about like certain aspects of my past or whatever. And it's like, this is a super interesting thing, man.
So you could probably answer this, or I would be the best to answer this in this conversation. That's for sure. Is it to put yourself into a different frame of mind or give a different perspective that you just don't naturally have, that like causes that like realization for him to be able to say things that he wasn't thinking?
Yeah. Well, I haven't been trained in IFS.
Oh,
so
okay,
I don't necessarily have like the go-to answer like from the book.
Yeah.
But like when I was thinking when you're describing that too, of like how much it was that was creating the space for you to relive that emotional time in a different way and allowing space for like, well, it sounds like it was also a traumatic thing for you. And so like, of course your brain wrote a different narrative so that you could survive and protect yourself from that point in
Right.
time. And so revisiting sounds like that was like opening the door to another narrative. And then I was also kind of thinking of how much like words and imagery are intertwined together. So like speaking to Tommy also has imagery associated with Tommy that helps you even drop into that to even help create the space to listen to whatever narrative
Right.
hasn't been spoken before. I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you're obviously more well versed in this realm than we are, especially me. But yeah, is there anything to the fact of like trying to avoid it rehashing trauma, or being able to like almost look at the past trauma third person without it, like maybe trying to disassociate of like it having a overly a negative effect on you? Diving back into that, is that one of the reasons, or?
Yeah. So you only do that for one, if you are ready to do that. I think that's the biggest thing. But also two, a counselor wouldn't let you do that unless you had the resources to self-soothe. So your counselor wouldn't have even brought you there if she didn't think that you would have the ability, if shit starts going sideways, that it could be worked through and not re-traumatize you.
I'm the best counselor patient.
Well, if you're going in 100%, then like, yeah, you are. You're like a dream patient or client to have.
And I think like an aspect of it too, that like from just like a personal standpoint is like not cutting off the thought with knowing where it's going.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a big one for like, I feel like a lot of people, and one of the things that she like associated with it is people who maybe don't feel worthy of love, right? Like that's I'm sure a common thing for a lot of people that go to counseling and they're married in like a loving marriage, right? And there's still a part of them from maybe something that happened in their childhood that make them feel like like they're not going to be loved, right? And so it's like being able to go back and talk to that childhood self to soothe this childhood feeling that's festering in your adult body now of being like, hey, like, it's okay, actually. Like, we're married, we're happy, like, I did it. I found love, or whatever that looks like for somebody. And that could apply to a bunch of different things. Because I do feel like a lot of the anxieties or things that can happen to some perspectives could be a little irrational. Like you're afraid that like, oh, nobody's going to love me. And it's like, we got a wife and 3 kids that like adore you. Like, but you could still convince yourself that like, I'm not worthy, or like, I don't trust that the love is real, or all those kind of things, where it's like, even though you have tangible proof, and sometimes I think in at least this, it is like going to the source and like addressing it with the source of like, this is what this is, you know, like, hey, no, it's okay. And I think being able to like compartmentalize in like a positive way of like compartmentalize that associating feeling. Like, let's say like I was feeling that, right? And it's like, I can associate that back to a couple of instances in my childhood as Tommy. And it's like, okay, hey, well, what can I do to help soothe him? What would be something that would make him feel better in this situation? And it's like, okay, well, like, what if I talked to him? And then, because like a big part of this, and this was the trippiest part, right? This is the thing that it's like, all right, I'm buying into this. Like, let's do it. Is you have to like leave them somewhere. You have to like put them, like, she'd be like, okay, like, where are you dropping Tommy off at? And I'd be like, in my mind, I'd be like at a park. And that was where that's where Tommy always was, right? So Tommy could play and have fun or whatever. And it's like, oh, I get it, dude. And you're like, and she's like, okay, is Tommy still there, or have you moved him? And in between sessions, like, go and check on him, kind of thing. And so it's like, all right, I'm gonna buy into this. Like, again, and again, I'm glad I had that conversation where she's like, oh, dude, bro, I totally get it. Yeah, but
it worked,
right? No, for sure. And it's like, you know, like, again, just using this example as like, you know, maybe I didn't feel like I was ever going to be loved or whatever, and you know, I could go back and have a conversation with him, and then, hey, you know what? I got a bunch of these rubber like wedding rings. What if I left one with him? You know, like, hey, Tommy, here's a reminder when you feel anxious about this, a reminder that like you have a tangible item of proof for yourself that like this is a thing that does happen for you later in life, kind of thing. And so it's all made up. But idea is like, if you can go to that source and compartmentalize that into his form, then you could potentially have a conversation or do something, write a letter, give a gift, something that would soothe that from happening.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's also like a ton of attachment-based work too, which is like again, thank you for sharing all of this in such a great detail. And I think this also sheds light on how there's so many ways to view this. There's so many different ways to tackle it. There's so many, like, I thought of like multiple interventions while you were talking, which is so cool because that means there are multiple ways that you can, if one way doesn't work for you, there are other things out there that you can also use or talk to your counselor about, like, this isn't clicking. All right, next. Yeah. Like, there are other ways we can go about tackling
She was very much like, especially after we had the like, bro, it's kind of weird though, right? And she is really wonderful, but she was like very much like, oh yeah, try explaining this to somebody who's not bought in. You know what I mean? Yeah. If they're going to be like, yeah, okay. But it's like you said, she was also very upfront that like, hey, if you ever feel like this is too much of a reach or like too far out there for you, where you're kind of like, man, I don't know about all this, let's try something else. This is
nice.
one way of tackling this. She's like, you see all those books over there? Those are all different ways to tackle this. So it's like, we got lots of options. And she was she has been such a blessing for me, but, she's very much like, what do you like? You know, like, hey, Thomas, you do a lot of work. You do a lot of stuff. I don't think sending you home with a bunch of homework papers is going to make you cool off very much. It's probably going to stress you out more. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And she's like, cool. I'm not going to do that. Let's do one more like other things, you know? And so I think that was like a super cool aspect of my situation with her, where it's just like very aware of like trying to cater and make this to where it like worked for me personally. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, which like thank God, like I know in my grad program, they're like, you need to pick one philosophy and one therapy and really train in it and get good in it, and like that's yours. Never be eclectic where you pull from like a bunch of different ones, or integrative where you have one but sometimes you pull from other ones. They're like, you need to stay away from that. You probably won't get hired. But it's like, this here's a real life example of how if I'm only trained in one but you desperately need something else. Oh, you shared a bunch. You shared a bunch of your life with me. Go find someone else. I can't help you.
Right.
Yeah. How do I know what you need before we start talking?
You know what's also funny to like triple down on what you just said? She's a drug and alcohol therapist. Like that is her main focus. Like I go to a recovery clinic. I'm not an alcoholic or a drug addict at all. And like she's like, yeah, no, that's like, you know, the focus of the clinic most often. But she's like, but we're all just like licensed, you know, counselors that like I can work with you on anything, you know?
Yeah.
And like one of the things was like, you know, where I do feel personally blessed that my coping mechanisms have never been drugs or alcohol, but you better believe I've had some coping mechanisms that look like addiction. You know what I mean? In like different aspects. It might look like Amazon packages, or, you know what I mean? Like buying crap I don't need, or like any of the other, you know, normal vices, social media or whatever, that people fall into. It's like, hey, you know what? Like, I don't want to fall into those either. So working with somebody that works with addiction is probably good too. And so, but to even like further down on it, it's like her main area of like training and focus is like, like recovering addicts. And it's like, and I think it just goes to show too, that it's like how, you know, again, like doubling down on that, like I feel blessed that even through my own problems in life, that I was lucky enough that I never turned to drugs or alcohol as my coping mechanism, because I could easily see how that can happen. You know what I mean? And like, luckily I found other like more positive things to like, I say that in air quotes, as like ways of, you know, dealing with things
that aren't physically addictive.
Right. And things that aren't like, you know, hugely detrimental, you know what I mean? I don't gamble or do anything like that. So it's like, there's lots of roads you can go down that are rougher than the ones I've gone down, luckily, for me at least. But it's like, I do think that is like, again, like a cool aspect of it. Like I remember the first time going in there, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. I like there's like all the, you know, like Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff. And she comes, she's like, hi, I'm, you know, so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Let's go talk. Like,
well, also like, that's cool. But I'm sure that's a rich and different perspective that she uniquely has that other counselors don't. It's kind of just like where I work. It's mostly psychologists also that have like an interest in sport. It's like, that's a unique background that can bring maybe a different perspective and richness to other cases that other places don't have. So it's like, having a specialty, but then also being trained in multiple different therapies can be so beneficial.
You're working in any competitive like environment, like you can bring a lot of what you've learned with working with athletes too.
And like her again, just to continue to shout out her, but it's like she also does a lot of like religious therapy as well. So it's like she's learned me well enough now to like when to bring up God and when to like go through other methods. And it's like, okay, cool. This is like, I'm getting a lot of different dynamics. And one of the things that I did that I would encourage people to do, and that I found a lot of success with, was whenever I was searching for somebody that I wanted to meet with. And again, like not to minimize, but my problems I didn't feel like were overly bad, but it was one of those things where I still felt like they had an effect on my life in a way I didn't want them to. And so that to me, if I had any other thing going on, like if I had a ankle that wasn't working the way I wanted it to, I would go to a physical therapist for it.
Yeah.
Like if it was like, yeah, it happened 10 years ago, but it still clicks kind of weird, or I'm not as stable or strong as I want to be, I would have gone to somebody for help because it's part of my body. Why would I not approach my brain the same way? It's not like this is a super debilitating, like I can't get out of bed, I'm dealing with crazy depression or anything. And it's like, and I say that to encourage, like, your problems don't have to be this massive thing or feel like it's this massive thing. It doesn't have to be debilitating to your everyday life, but I like to try to perform optimally. I like to, with sports, with lifting, with like my jujitsu and with my work. And for me to be able to do all of those things, I have to take care of my body a certain way. And I have to take care of my mind a certain way. But where I found a lot of success in figuring out that I was like, you know what, I think I want to do this, was I emailed a bunch of different counselors, probably like 10 of them, and just was honest, was like, hey, I am searching for a counselor. I don't have anything like overly crazy going on. I just have some things that I want to work through, but I'm very interested in counseling. Would you be okay to just sit down or have a phone call for like 5 to 10 minutes just so I could kind of see if I feel like you might be the right fit for me? And I went to 4, and then on my 5th one was my current counselor, and I walked out and I'm like, I'm canceling the rest of them. Like, you're it. Like, you've got it. Like, I knew from the moment I sat down with her, we talked for like 20 minutes and it was just like, it clicked. And I was like, perfect. There it is. There was other ones I was like, oh yeah, like I could see like this seems to be working. And it was like, nope. As soon as I went in with her, I was like, nope, this feels like the right environment. Like whatever it is, like this clicks, it feels right.
I love that you interviewed, because that's because the rapport is the most important part, but it's also the counselor interviewing you.
Right.
Because I know too, there are clients I won't take, because for one thing, I'm not interested, and I'll just flat out say that I'm not interested in like dealing with whatever it is that you're wanting help with. So I wouldn't be a good fit. Or like 2, I haven't had much training in that, nor do I care to. So probably not. So that's why it's so important to interview.
One of them reached out to me and was like, hey, as much as I'd love to meet with you, I looked you up on social media and we have too many mutual friends. I just like, I think our circles might cross a little too close, where it was like somebody like, and she named names, which was nice, but it was like, she's like, I'm good friends with so-and-so and so-and-so, like hang out with them regularly. And I see you are very good friends with so-and-so and so-and-so and hang out with them regularly. We could have actually even crossed paths before, but like the chance of us crossing paths in like a friendship environment probably kind of high. So I'd happily recommend other people to you and blah, blah, blah. But it was like, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I reached out and like, didn't just like set my first appointment and then her being like, wait a minute, you look kind of familiar. Are you friends with so-and-so? Yeah. And they were like, okay, well, nice to meet you. Have a good day. You know? And the nice thing, and not to say this is common or whatever, but nobody charged me or had any expectation of like trying to charge me. In fact, kind of like to what you're saying, they were all like genuinely like happy. They were like, yes, I would love to do that. I can talk to you today, you know, if you want. And so it was a very positive experience for me. And then I was like, cool. Like and I even told my counselor at the, like, as we were finishing it, and I'm like, I'm going to be honest, I have a couple more of these, but I felt very comfortable with you. If you felt comfortable with me and feel like it's a good fit, I would love to just go ahead and schedule like an intake with you and like go ahead and do it. And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And so I do encourage people to do that. It's like, it's so funny to me, and I know you can attest to this as well as anybody too, is when people come up to you and they go, who's your tattoo artist? I want to get a tattoo. And my question is, what kind of tattoo do you want to get?
Right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as much as I love Zach, I have not, and I'm making this up, I don't actually know this, but it's like, I ain't seen Zach pumping out a bunch of American traditional. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like he does black and gray realism or color realism. Like that is a lot of what he does. And it's like,
he's great at that.
He's incredible at that. But like, if you want something else, like he might not be worth, like it's not worth his time or your time. Like, like they're going to be people who are the right fit. And that was the thing is it's like, I don't want to, like, what if I schedule one appointment and I'm like, okay, it's going to be, I'm not going to see this person for like 2 weeks. And I sit down, I'm like an hour, we do this whole intake thing. We're like filling out paperwork. And I'm like, this guy's kind of annoying, you know? Like, I'm going to be like, okay, cool. Well, this was a huge waste of time for both of us.
I've heard that story so often, like, especially from like friends and family, like, it's just because people don't know, because they're also not taught that like some therapy modalities or philosophies may not be the kind of therapeutic relationship that they're working for, but how are they going to know the difference between cognitive behavioral, existentialism, attachment based? Like, you don't know what that means unless you've gone to school for it.
That's why I'm paying a professional.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like those consultations are really important too, because it's like, well, also know what you want out of a therapeutic relationship. Like, for instance, like, my sister also, like, she was like, I want to go someone that is giving me homework, telling me what to do, like really just like a lot of psychoeducation. I'm like, that's CBT. You need to find someone that practices CBT. Right. And she didn't. She found someone that practiced existentialism, which is just like a bunch of Socratic questioning and silence.
Yeah.
So it's like, that was the opposite of what she wanted and needed. And then she got deterred away from counseling. And it's like, and I understand why.
Right.
You didn't know.
You got a bad tattoo because you didn't go to the right tattoo artist.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, yeah, those consultations are really important.
Yeah.
I also think knowing the difference between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker, and a professional counselor, those are all different, or all have different educational backgrounds, and all approach therapy in a way different ways. So also knowing what the differences between all of those are.
I have no idea what the difference is. Do you have a quick explanation?
I do have a quick explanation. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They went to med school, and they are more so like med management, but also treating the physical sides of things. But they also do like talk therapy too. They usually work in conjunction with counselors or social workers, like as a whole, like team. Psychologists, they went to a lot of school. They got a PhD, they did a dissertation, like they've done like postdoctoral internship, and they're more so educated on like diagnosing and data and research, and they do like just a whole bunch of psychological evals. Of course, they're taught how to do talk therapy too, but a lot of their training is diagnosing. Like right now, I work at an office. I'm the only counselor because everyone else got a bunch of education that I did not get, and they do full-blown 3-4 hour like psych eval testing for people. Very different experience, but they also take on counseling clients, just not as many. And a social worker is kind of like a counselor. They get a master's, go through internship, but they also are like resource pullers. You need a divorce lawyer, you need housing, you need XYZ. Like they're also trained in that element. Whereas like mental health counselors, it's more so like relationship, stress, issues. Like I'm not necessarily pulling resources from the community, but I'm working like more on like an interpersonal level.
That's where I want to hear the rest of it. But that's where my wife used to work in social work. She didn't get her master's or anything, but she worked with counselors at her where she worked, but she was more of the resource puller and worked with a lot of kids and families. So,
which is like, it's great because all of those have different like backgrounds and purposes, and like you can create a whole team if you have the means and the resources to do so. But I also just don't think people don't know the difference. Like, you know, like I wouldn't go to a social worker if I'm wanting a psych eval. I would go to a psychologist.
Right.
Or if I need help med managing and I also want to learn about sauna and cold therapy, probably go to a psychiatrist that's like an integrative psychologist.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you know, most of our education and what we know from that is like from like TV shows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, your mental health, it's a psychiatrist, right? Like that's what I've like heard, you know, that's what I've seen. And it's like, oh no, you know, like finding like a licensed counselor is like, oh, for like traditionally, like what, you know, like, do you think you have ADHD? Go to a psychiatrist. Like, you know, like that's more of a thing kind of there, I guess. But like, but yeah, it's, kind of back to what you were saying earlier when I was like meeting with them, those were like my questions were like, what kind of like specific modalities do you traditionally use? And they would kind of be like this, and this. And I'd kind of be like, I'll be honest, I don't know what any of those are. Can you explain them? And they'd be like, okay, yeah, no problem. Like this is more like this is more like that. This is more like this. And I'm like, okay, cool. And that was like one of the things that like I really liked about going to mine was she was like, oh, I got a lot I like. I like this, I like this, I like this, I like this. And it was kind of like, okay, cool. I like that. I like options. You know, like it makes me feel like there's if something doesn't work, I'm not having to switch people. I'm just switching like modes, you know, or like maybe what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of safety in that too. Alone, knowing that you have that option.
Well, and like, you know, the thing too is because I'd done counseling in the past, right? I'd done counseling when I was like really young, when my parents were like going through a divorce kind of thing. And then did it again, like pretty young in college. And like, as daunting as it is, as like, I perceived it being daunting. And one of the reasons that like kept me away from it so long was like, I don't want to have to catch somebody all the way up to speed again. You know what I mean? I don't want to have to like re-explain all of the same issue. Okay, so this. And it's like, I feel like I got over this and I got this and this. And it's like, all right, you know, and I finally got to a point where I'm like, all right, I feel like I'm ready to dump it all out again. Right. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm ready to. And that was like one of the things, again, that was like, I was trying to attract myself to, or like was people who were like, because I'm also somebody who it's like, I like, hey, problem, cool, upkeep. All right, you know, I'll see you once a month, like in perpetuity. Because guess what? My life's always going to have stress, always going to have struggles. Yeah. You're always going to be like I can always use this room for whatever I need. Because there's days that we go in where it's like, okay, next week we're going to talk about this. And I come in and I'll be like, you will not guess what Kevin said to me at work today. And she'll be like,
again?
She'll be like, Queen, sit down. Let's talk about it. But sit down, girl boss. Let's talk. But like, that was a big thing for me was like, hey, if I want this to be something that like I can use not just when I'm like struggling, right? That this for me is something that can be just like I go to physical therapy every other week. I don't have any torn anything. I don't have any broken anything. I'm going because between him and my chiropractor, like they keep me from getting injured. We work on muscular imbalances and things that like I have nagging whatever injuries, and it's like I can work on these things to prevent things from, you know, boiling over body wise. And same thing for counseling is like get to a point where I'm like, hey, this just keeps the lid on things for me, you know? And I think that can be super healthy for me too. And like, again, when I wanted somebody that had training in a lot of modalities, cause like, guess what? I don't know what the hell's going to happen for me for like the rest of my life. Yeah. And so it's like having somebody who I feel like could navigate those things that I might see once a month for the next, I don't know, forever kind of thing.
That's why I think it's so important if people do, which I get, it's already hard to reach for help in the first place. And I understand that that's a hurdle. I just think in the long run, it also helps if at the beginning you do that, like you literally like vet yourself. What do I want? What do I need? What's my goal? Like, where am I bleeding out from that I need covered first and I can get to other shit later? Like if you do that questioning first, and then you also do your research about the professional help you need and the like specific kind of professional help that you need. Yes, that's like upfront, like front loading it, but long term will save your ass or like having to not do what you described, which is start over again and again and again.
So, because then again, I'm like, okay, well, like if I just had the same one who knows my story, you know, who like I see on a regular basis and remembers the things that have happened because we've talked, you know, ad nauseum about them at certain things, but it's like if I was every time I was like going through an issue, it's like, okay, time to re-explain my entire life to you so that you understand the connections of why this bothered me or something like that. Where it's like, if I have some semblance of consistency and somebody who knows, well, then I can kind of be like, hey, this happened. And they can be like, oh, that's like that time when you were blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, yeah. And they'd be like, all right, well, let's unpack that.
There can also be a lot of insight with that too. They're able to connect dots because they have more of the narrative.
Right.
And then there can even be more insight and richness that's brought to that you may not get if you have to therapy or have to counselor hop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It is funny you talking about like kind of interviewing and trying out some different counselors when you were first starting, how happy everybody was to just sit down with you. It sounds like counselors as a group are a pretty happy group. It's a pretty happy profession, which I think kind of makes sense because maybe because of and correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe because of you should help yourself before you can help other people kind of deal.
Oh no, we're the most fucked up. No, if you're in the helping profession, you're the most fucked up. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's from a place of understanding of like, yeah, you fucked up too. It's like that Spider-Man meme.
Yeah,
there's a reason you picked to go into that profession.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I get super pumped when people do consultations because I'm like, dude, you did it. You got over the worst hurdle, which is like even admitting that you either want help or you're just curious about learning more too. And that's equally as exciting. And like, I know for me personally, that was an exciting process to not feel like a shitbag all the time. And so I'm pumped that someone else is in front of me wanting to go through that process too.
Nice.
And like, I'm blessed that they chose me for that.
Yeah.
So maybe not necessarily internally at peace, but very nice to other people, understanding of other people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't get into the profession unless it brings some kind of meaning and fulfillment to be able to act as that guide for someone else.
That makes a lot of sense because it's like, no one ever grew up with like, I lived a perfect childhood.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to help other people that didn't live a perfect childhood figure out how to live a perfect life now.
Right.
Like, I don't think that I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but maybe probably not as frequent.
I want to meet that fucker. Yeah. Tell me what job they're doing because it ain't mental health.
Question for you, because this is something that I brought up recently, and I'm just curious. I feel like you get to like celebrate a lot of, hopefully, if things are going well, a lot of wins. I want to say to you, because I don't know if as the person being the provider in sorts in these kind of situations, but thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a counselor. Thank you for being the person willing to be there, because I do feel like it is potentially also kind of because it is so patient focused naturally, that like I think it could be potentially at times a thankless job, or that people don't spend the time to be like, hey, like, thank you for helping me. So thank you for helping people, because like you probably underestimate how profound of an effect you can have on other people's lives. So yeah, thank you. You're doing a really cool thing that is probably like, even though it's fun and exciting at times, I'm sure it's also really hard. And so it's one of those things where it's not like it pays $1 bazillion either. And so I think that is a really cool aspect. For me right now is to just say like, thank you for being one of the people that stepped into that role to dedicate their life to helping others.
Well, thanks for thinking.
Yeah.
I do have to say, I think some of the, like, I will speak on behalf of some of the other counselors, especially the ones that I personally know. The biggest thanks is having that person come in and be like, hey, I made it through that competition. Hey, like, my wife and I didn't argue last night. And it's like, fuck, yes. Like, that's it. That's the thanks.
Yeah.
But also, thank you.
Yeah,
That's nice
of
to
course.
I know he talks about all the time, working in the fitness industry, how many years of life have we created because we helped someone get on a better health path. I would like to think, how many good days have you created for people in general?
Haven't thought about that.
I bet it's a lot.
It's like, I counted here. It's on my calendar. I tell you this.
Speaking of good days, we are at like 2.5 hours right now. This has been amazing. This has been super, super cool. So to just kind of wrap things up, again, thank you first for coming on and talking about all this like super interesting stuff. Thank you for also being a person in my like personal life that I come to with these kind of things as well. Because like I kind of referenced earlier, I think having a friend who is also kind of in this, that I get to kind of celebrate some of my victories with somebody who does understand like just what those kind of like just in the line of work that you do, understanding what those victories can look like. And so it's been very cool to share those with you. And that has been very meaningful to me, and I hope you know that. But also, like I was saying earlier, thank you for being a person willing to not just help somebody perform at their job, not just help somebody perform for a tournament or perform for a sporting event, but also being there to, you know, help someone with their life, with their day-to-day life, with just existing on this earth as we all do, is just trying to be humans. And so I know you've done a lot of work with kids and a lot of stuff that kind of like Kevin was saying too a second ago is just you and your personality and the way that I know you handle things and the way you take care of other people and people around you. I know you made a lot of good days. And so I love you personally. And I just appreciate you a lot for being in my life and for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I love you too. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, seriously, thank you. This was a really, really fun episode. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
So
yay! Well, if you want any more therapy sessions, let me know.
Yeah.
No, for real though, this is a very important thing of like, is there I don't want to cut you off if you
No, you're good.
Okay.
That's
You know, again, I feel like as we've kind of talked, like if you are looking for just help in general, if you are looking for performance help when it comes to like work or sports or, you know, maybe you have a kid, I know you're going to come and talk to our volleyball team. We're going to set up a time for you to come and talk to our girls and kind of help them with, you know, some of this stuff. Or, you know, so if you have a kid or somebody who you feel like could benefit from some performance help or just life help in general, is there a good way to get a hold of you or like reach out to you so that you can get some business?
Yeah. So I'm actually working at Commander Counseling and Wellness down in Norman. But I also do telehealth too. So they have a website, commandercw.com. Their phone number and email is on there. And then I'm also on Psychology Today, which is also the same like email and phone number. And I am taking clients right now.
Perfect. So, yeah, should have asked that before I put all that out there. But seriously, if you are looking for any kind of help, like I kind of talked about before, I recommend, you know, talking to a couple of people, interviewing a couple, kind of figuring out, and having them help you. I didn't know what I was looking for. You know what I mean? Like I can tell that story and make it sound like I knew, but I didn't know until I started sitting down and talking to people. And a big thing for me is I am a huge proprietor of counseling. I think it is a huge and important thing. I think people in today's world, we deal with so much, whether it's noise or stimulation or just hardships or just struggles. And I think trying myself to help break the stigma in any way, that it is a normal thing, that it's totally okay. And you're not weird, you're not wrong, you're not broken. People need help. We all need help. We all, if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you probably go to the gym and work on your body and do those kind of things. Don't neglect your brain. Like Rachel was saying earlier, they are not two separate things. They're all part of one. So don't just train half, work on yourself in as many ways as you can. And I promise you're going to go in there and you might have convinced yourself they're going to laugh at you and tell your problems aren't real or whatever. They're not going to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I think that was one of my irrational fears, but like really you sit down and especially if you get the right one, they can have some profound effects on your life. So I share my story to hopefully help people feel more comfortable to want to do it themselves. Because I do think it is worth your time. It is worth your time for sure. So
how do I drop this?
But yeah, anything else before we sign off here? Because yeah, we're overtime.
I know, I'm like getting sleepy. It's almost 8.
Oh, it's 8:07.
Dang.
Yeah, I know. I know.
No, but I think that's it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Episode 64.
64. Let's go. What are we going to do for episode 69? Am I right? Give me a high five. Nice. All right.
I was hoping that was mine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Thank you guys for listening, especially if you stuck through this whole one. I know this is kind of a longer one, but appreciate you guys. Episode 64.
Thanks, guys.
Peace out, Girl Scouts.